The final thing I want to say, and then turn over to others to speak, but the example of colonization I want to give is from my new book that I'm working on, which is on Sanskrit, hijacking of Sanskrit, by a group of people led by a scholar called Sheldon Pollock in the US. What they are doing is they have their own history. He has developed his own history of Sanskrit. I won't discuss the details. I gave a talk in the Sanskrit department in Delhi University. It was hugely attended. A lot of people came. And we're thinking of doing a seminar in the middle of the year. And, JNU should be a big part in that. And I'm writing a book on this. But just to give you an essence of it, what that school of Pollock has done is they really want to undermine Sanskrit and make the case that rather than the lingua franca that links all the languages in the traditional sense, this role should be played by English, because Sanskrit can't play the role. So this setting aside of Sanskrit is very important for their goal. And the revival of Sanskrit studies, they're promoting Sanskrit studies. The revival of Sanskrit studies should be through the Western lens. So they've come up with their own theories of language, literature, how you interpret things, philology, political philology. It should all be through the lens of Western thought. And the way they interpret Greek and Latin is how they're going to apply that to Sanskrit. And therefore, oral Sanskrit, they don't recognize as a legitimate Sanskrit. They think that, according to them, the history of Sanskrit starts when writing starts, which means that huge early period of history when it was oral is not recognized. The reason being that they don't have any tools how you study an oral language. Since Greek, Latin, so in their own past, in the European past, languages were not sophisticated as oral traditions. They didn't have a very sophisticated oral tradition, so they don't recognize it. And there are many such distortions in the history of Sanskrit. And the distortion of Ramayana, I won't get into, but a lot of distortions on what is Ramayana, how they interpret Ramayana. They have their own interpretation on the relationship between Sanskrit and the Indian vernaculars. So that also is a problem for us. And then why Sanskrit spread through much of Asia without violence, without any conquering army, without any force. How did it spread? They understand that it spread peacefully, but they're trying to come up with a theory. So they come up with a very interesting conspiracy theory that the Brahmin and the king conspired to keep the people under control, to rule and oppress over people. So the Brahmin's job was to make the king look divine. He would do a ritual, magic ritual, so that everyone would think the king has become divine, and they would therefore obey. And this divine king could become a dictator, had no norms, rules, nothing applying to him. And he would be very thankful to the Brahmin and keep the Brahmin well fed and looked after, because the Brahmin is the one who's giving him this stature of being the divine king. So they're kind of a conspiracy. And then the Brahmin would send some people to the next kingdom and the next kingdom. So over a period of several centuries, much of Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia were taken over by a kind of Sanskrit colonization, if you will. That's what their thesis is. So this whole lot of very heavy material they have produced, and I tried to get help from, because my knowledge is limited and I have limited time, and I cannot write all this and think all this. I wanted many people to help me. So the people I got in India to help me figure out certain aspects, none of them could decode what Pollock is writing, because it's very heavy, complex, dense English, using arguments and philosophies and theories which our traditional people would not know. So what they're creating is a new era of Sanskrit, where our traditional Sanskrit scholars will be outsiders. They will not even know what's going on. They will not be able to understand what's going on. They'll have to go to a Western country and learn how to study Sanskrit from the Western point of view. Otherwise, they won't even get a job, because the whole system will be changed. Now, the reason this Pollock school became particularly dangerous and particularly important for me is that the previous government gave him a Padma Shri, so he became legitimate. He's produced a lot of PhDs who got prominent jobs in important places in India. Narayan Murthy's foundation given him huge number of millions of dollars of grant to be the editor-in-chief and of a project at Harvard to translate many old texts into English. And they want to translate 500 Indian texts and create a massive Murthy library. And the interpretation of these texts and what the words mean, how to interpret the stories, which stories to select, how to portray, is being done by that group. So they've come up with a theory called political philology, which is the way to interpret these texts, Indian texts. And political philology, as he explains it, is an interpretation to show oppression. Social oppression is the way to interpret Indian texts. So when you're looking at a text, you're not looking at it from the point of view of the spiritual value or other cultural value that Indians have for that text, but you are going to look at it from the point of view of who was oppressing whom, and how do you decide, and what are the rules for telling oppressor oppression kind of game that society was full of, as if there was nothing else happening in Indian society. Of course there's oppression, but there's oppression in Latin society, Greek society, in modern American society today. There's oppression and it's bad, and the oppression has to be fought. But people don't study English from the point of view of a language of oppression. People don't study German or French or Russian or Chinese. They don't study like that. They don't study Arabic like that. Of course, all those cultures have oppression. But somehow picking on Sanskrit as a language of oppression became a very deep project of Sheldon Pollock and his group. So I'm working on a book on that. So my scope of studying these colonial effects and decolonizing is pretty vast, and I think I'll stop and turn over to other people, then we'll have a discussion. Thank you.